Welcome to This is What Democracy Sounds Like. I'm Kevin Prang. This program is a presentation of Metropolitan Congregations United. MCU is a community organization that brings together religious congregations, community groups, and individuals to work for a common purpose to create a better life for all residents of the region. We work at the intersection of race, economy, political power, gender, and the structures of oppression at work within us individually, within our organization, and within the community. We are working towards building people's control of the government, building community control of the economy, expanding the public sphere, and creating structural racial equity. Today, my guests are Lexi Amos and Soendker Nicholson of the Clean Missouri campaign and Robert Karr, an organizer with MCU. Today, we're going to talk about Amendment 3, which will appear on the November 3rd ballot in Missouri and looks to reverse Clean Missouri initiative that was passed by voters in 2018. The November 3rd election is right around the corner. It's been a long journey to get here. Bob, just take us back and tell us about MCU's participation in making sure Clean Missouri became law and then in defending it. Tell us how you became involved and how the organization's been involved.
Well, thanks. In 2018, gathering signatures on the petition to get Clean Missouri on the ballot was my initial involvement with that kind of work with MCU. So that was a great experience. And of course, we're very pleased to get it on the ballot and achieve that success. So also very disappointing to see what happened in the last period of time as a follow-up to that.
Following up on that, what was your feeling when you saw that even before the November was out in 2018, the Missouri legislature was already planning something to overturn it?
Well, it was very disappointing and actually insulting to be told that I, as a voter, didn't understand what I was voting for. I clearly understood what I was voting for. And I think most all of the people, the 62% of the voters in Missouri across the whole state that supported that constitutional amendment knew exactly what they were voting for.
Now, not only has the issue itself had some battling back and forth, but there's even been manipulation of ballot language, and that dispute ended up in the courts. So what was the problem with the ballot language, and then how did things end up? Where do we stand now?
The politicians who crafted Amendment 3 knew that voters weren't going to be excited about what's in the fine print. So they have attached a $5 change to lobbyist gift limits and a $100 change to state Senate contribution limits as a way to distract voters from what's really going on, which is a gerrymandering scheme. But even beyond that, beyond that fundamental construction, they wanted to put dishonest ballot language on all of our ballots, overstating and misstating what was actually in the fine print. So we sued citizens who were part of the 2017-2018 campaign, sued right after Amendment 3 was sent to the ballot by the General Assembly. And we said, hey, the ballot summary language can't say things that aren't true, and it can't say that it's going to change things that it's not changing. And so a Cole County judge agreed with that, rewrote the language. The state appealed, so the legislature and the Secretary of State appealed, and then we went to the Western District Court of Appeals. The Western District agreed that the legislature lied, so affirmed the fundamental decision, but they wanted the language rewritten a slightly different way. So there have been 3 ballot language versions now for Amendment 3, but the fundamental truths are the same. And when voters get their ballots, either they go cast an early absentee one or they go in on November 3rd, you're going to see 2 bullets up top. One is about the $5 change to lobbyist gifts. One is about the $100 change to contribution limits. We all know that's the wrapping paper. The real stuff is in number 3. You'll also see on the ballot that local governments expect significant revenue losses if this passes because of some of the fundamental changes that Amendment 3 would make to who counts and how communities are represented.
Now, did I see something yesterday online that some ballots are getting out with old language on it?
There were 2 isolated spots, so 2 counties, Buchanan County up St. Joe in northwest Missouri, and then Vernon County, Nevada in southwest Missouri. A few hundred folks got ballots that were printed with the original illegal language, but that's been addressed. Those no one is getting those ballots anymore. Those folks are getting notified that they got the dishonest illegal language. So it was a scramble for a couple hours just to make sure that it was taken care of. But the LEAs have gotten it buttoned up now, and no one outside of those two counties had that issue.
Amendment 3 does more than just eliminate redistricting changes that were passed by over 60% of Missouri voters. It goes further and rewrites who gets counted to be represented. So tell us about this change. This seems to be the biggest thing in the heart of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty profound and huge change. For 150 years, Missouri has counted everyone in our maps, or everyone who's in Missouri counts in our maps. After the census is completed, the census requires you count everyone, whether you're 4 years old or whether you're 100 years old, everybody counts. And then we divide that population by the number of Senate districts or the number of House districts. What the supporters of Amendment 3 want to do is draw maps based on the eligible voter population of the state, not the total population. That sounds good for 2 to 3 seconds until you realize that that means that 1.5 million Missourians who aren't eligible to vote would not be counted and would not have representation in the state capitol. Almost all of those impacted individuals would be kids who aren't eligible just because they happen to be 17 or younger, but also non-citizen immigrants, regardless of their status, would not be represented and would not be counted. For context, 2% of Missouri's population, 2% are non-citizen immigrants, 23% of our population are kids. So it's a full 1 in 4 Missourians would not be counted in their state house and state senate districts. And that has very real downstream effects if that happens.
This means that some communities are not going to have the numbers to be represented, or they'll have less representation. What does that mean for individual communities, and how is that affecting local communities, and who comes out ahead and who comes out behind?
Yeah, so it's fundamentally wrong what they're trying to do. It also is discriminatory. So one of the national gerrymandering masterminds behind this whole idea, who's been working on this, he's passed away now, but he did a report a couple years ago on this change. And he talked about such a change would be advantageous to non-Hispanic whites. And that's because communities of color just happen to be younger as a cohort than white voters. So what's on the table right now is essentially a plan where 1 in 5 white Missourians are not counted in the maps, but it's 1 in 4 Black Missourians, and it's half of the Latino and Asian Missouri population, like just because there's kids and non-citizens in those communities. It also has a huge impact on suburban communities. So in St. Louis, for instance, almost 1 in 3 residents of Wentzville are non-voters. It's tons of families, tons of kids. So Wentzville is a community that would be dramatically impacted, along with Ferguson, Florissant in North County. St. Charles County actually would lose more of its representation as a percentage of its current power than St. Louis or Washington County or other counties or Franklin County, the counties that it borders. So it is bad for growing communities, like they lose. It's bad for young communities with lots of families, and discriminatory. So it's bad for all sorts of reasons. That is this is why every state in America does not do this. Every state counts everyone. And these folks behind Amendment 3 want to make Missouri the only state to be drawing maps this way.
And am I right in understanding too that having Missouri do that may actually be a test case, a first case scenario that this could then be moved out to other states within the country?
That's correct. So this is not an idea that came up out of Missouri. We just happened to be the first place where in-state bad actors and national bad actors got together and said, hey, let's do this. So there was a Supreme Court case on this very question a few years ago called Evanwell v. Abbott. It came out of Texas. And so there has been an effort by some gerrymandering enthusiasts to say, hey, let's get another shot at that. So yes, if we are unsuccessful here and this passes, we could, this might pop up in other states.
In what other ways does Amendment 3 weaken protections for minority communities? This is undercounting, but in what other ways does Amendment 3 sort of do that?
Yeah, so in the Clean Missouri Amendment that we passed a couple years ago, that made Missouri a national leader in legal protections to protect the voting power of communities of color. That is the very first criteria for any map that's considered. It comes before partisan fairness, it comes before competition, it comes before all the things. You got to draw districts that are the same size, and then the first thing you do is make sure that the voting power of communities of color is protected. Amendment 3 weakens those legal protections and essentially ties us to the Voting Rights Act. Right now, with the Missouri Constitution, the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act is the floor, and we have protections beyond that. And that's super important because you've got growing communities and across the state, and it's especially important for Latino and Asian American communities where they may not ever make up 50% of a state house district, but they can make up a meaningful electoral block that helps elect a candidate of their choice. So like those protections are in the Constitution now, and that's important. Amendment 3 would get rid of that and then would make the Voting Rights Act ceiling, which is super problematic because there's also a national effort to undermine some of the core provisions of the Voting Rights Act in the courts, in Congress. So beyond the population change, like they're objectively and intentionally weakening the protections that are in the Constitution right now.
Okay, and Bob, it seems to me that these are the points that MCU is really concerned about, protecting our communities of color within the St. Louis area, North St. Louis and North County. What are some of the discussions being had within MCU about what's going on?
Well, as you said, this is very consistent with MCU's focus on racial equity, et cetera. And so we just need to continue to educate people so that they understand the connection between the fundamental things that MCU's focused on for a number of years and Amendment 3, which is not, as Sean has nicely said, is not obvious at first look. And so we just need to continue to educate our volunteers about the important aspects of this that will disproportionately negatively impact community of color.
So those are all ways that the count is being changed. So let's turn now to the administration of the districting process. Now that's being changed under Amendment 3 also from what we passed in Clean Missouri. Sean, what are some of the details there?
Sometimes folks focus just on the process at the exclusion of everything else that's going on, and that's a mistake. But even the process that is proposed in Amendment 3 is not the one that we had back in 2011 or 2001. So what they want to do, the fundamental goal of Amendment 3 is to let lobbyists and political operatives draw the maps in back rooms to protect the interests and the politicians that are their favorites. So they want to get rid of the independent checks and balances that are in the Constitution now. They want to get rid of the super strong transparency rules that are in the Constitution now. And then they want to have map-making commissions that are totally partisan, that are made up of members who are screened by local political parties and then picked by the governor. They want to make those commissions bigger, and they want to give the state Democratic Party and the state Republican Party more controls, new powers they've never had for picking commissioners to really pack that room with folks who are going to advance their interests. So it is, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it is the exact opposite of all of the things that people have been working on in Missouri and across the country to go from an independent system with checks and balances and transparency to a more secretive, more partisan than ever kind of system.
So as well as putting the process more in the hands of politicians, this is all about making the process more opaque. What are some of the ways that happens?
Yeah, so with the voter-approved rules that we worked so hard on in 2017 and 2018, the independent partisan state demographer goes first in the process, and that individual and their office is required by law to turn over all of the data that they used, and they give all of that data to the Secretary of State. So we all have a shared data set that we can look at and say, oh, okay, this is what influenced the drafting of those plans. When the commissions that have existed, continue to exist, will continue to exist, do their work, we all know we've got our own data that we can see, that they can see to figure out, is there a more fair way to do this, a way to keep communities together in a better way, a way to achieve all the things that we want to do in redistricting plans. What Amendment 3 does is it gets rid of that demographer's role at the front end. So there's no independent flag that's planted. And then there's a nod to turning over the data for an early draft map, but there's no requirement that the commissions actually have to approve a draft plan. There's a big old loophole that is like right in there where they can just adopt a politician protection consensus map that just makes super safe districts, and we don't have any idea what data was used for that final plan. So they don't want to they don't want to have to show their work and explain who they're trying to protect. So that is why they've crafted that way.
And then the final sort of surprise in all this too is that it restricts how much those maps can be challenged on the back end.
Yeah. So one thing that's super important is that everyone in Missouri has the standing to say, hey, this map is not fair. It breaks the law. I can do the math. I can see the standards and the rules for how maps should be drawn. We have the ability to go to court and challenge that. That's an important part of the process so that we know that the outcome is going to be fair to voters at the back end. What Amendment 3 proposes to do is unprecedented new rules to change who can even bring a lawsuit. And then they want to make it so a judge can't even throw out a map plan, even if the judge finds that it's unconstitutional. So there's two parts to that. It's a little technical, but when you bring a lawsuit, you have to be able to convince the judge that, hey, I'm a person who ought to be able to bring this lawsuit. So right now, I'm a Missourian who's going to vote in these maps. You have standing. Great. You can have that conversation with the judge. You got to make your case. It doesn't mean you're going to win, but you have the ability and you have the right to make that. They want to change the rules so that if you're in an overpacked district, you don't have any standing to sue. So they want to cut out an entire class of Missourian and say, you don't get to sue. And then they want to add additional restrictions on how judges can fix it by saying you can only adjust the lines to satisfy the claims made by the people who happen to make it through the gate on the front end. You can't throw out the whole thing as fundamentally flawed. Now that's a big deal. It may not sound like a big deal at first, but it's a big deal because our current state Senate plan that we have right now, we got it because the whole plan got thrown out because it was fundamentally flawed back in 2011. In Pennsylvania a couple years ago, the state Supreme Court said this whole thing is we can't, you pull one little string and then you got to do the next one and then that impacts the next district over. Sometimes you need the ability to start over. Doesn't mean that that's the only remedy, but our Constitution is about protecting our rights and making sure that we can get to a fair outcome. And they want to use the state constitution so that we can have our day in court and to take away rights that we have right now. So that's just the exact opposite point of a state constitution.
So we're not talking necessarily about endorsements per se, because we're in opposition of this, but who's on our side when opposing this particular amendment? It seems like it's a broad coalition here.
Yeah, it's a bigger coalition than we had in 2018, given the nasty details that are in the fine print and given just the fundamental, to Bob's earlier point, citizens passed a thing and now politicians are trying to undo it. We've been able to grow our coalition beyond that. So, we're up to, well north of 300 different organizations and leaders and associations from around the state. It is a very bipartisan coalition. There were Republican no votes in the Senate and the House when this thing got sent to the ballot. There's been, super strong opposition from conservative leaders like Senator Jack Danforth saying hey, we all these are not competition, fairness, collaboration. These are all universal values. These are not partisan values, and we should be standing up because the heart of our democracy is at stake. There's even been an increase in business opposition to this, given just what would happen if Missouri becomes the first state to pass a discriminatory law. The nation will respond, and then we've seen really strong opposition from mayors and academics and business leaders across the state because, regardless of political party, we need our communities to be fully counted. We all fail if our kids and our neighbors aren't counted in the population because we won't be adequately represented in the state capitol.
Well, that brings us to getting out the vote now. So what is the state campaign doing to educate folks? This is a complicated issue. And so what are the plans?
Yeah, it is an exciting time. We are out talking to voters. Right now, we are talking to folks 3 different times a week. We do all of our voter contact virtually, which is awesome during the time that we are in a pandemic. Having the opportunity to do them virtually is a real blessing. And it's also a great way to do it and still create community and excitement, so that we realize that, as Sean was lifting up, like, this is something that is broad and is beyond, kind of how we sit in our own particular space. And so we do them on Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And what we do is folks join us via Zoom. We talk about the policy, help to explain what is the best way to talk about it on the phone, and help voters understand that when they see that ballot, that there's going to be confusion, because that's the purpose behind it, and then that what the actual intent and impact will be if that would pass, and get them to commit to vote no. And so we talk about that. Then we do training on a system that we've been using, and after that we make calls together as a community, and then come back and debrief and talk about how we are, how do we move forward and, continue this fight. And we are also working with, there's groups doing this all around the state. And so I will also let Bob talk about what they are also doing. So that's the other beauty of what we are doing, is that this is such an important issue. It's touching so many different aspects of folks that are, working towards different a democracy that works for people instead of politicians, and that I am the person who is running them for the campaign, and that is one option. But I will give it to Bob now to kind of talk about what MCU is doing in particular around it as well.
Oh, thanks, Lexi. So MCU is asking people to get involved multiple ways. The first one is to educate themselves so they can talk to their friends and neighbors and anyone that will listen about Amendment 3 and the negative things that would happen if Amendment 3 passes. And then secondly, we're offering volunteer opportunities to people through either phone banking or text banking. MCU will start its phone banking on October 1st next week, and we'll do that just within MCU volunteers for about 3 weeks. We'll also start soon with text banking. Both of those are well supported with technology and are easy to learn, and it's a great way for people to get involved. And then in the last 10 days, as Lexi alluded to, in the last 10 days before November 3rd, MCU will join many other organizations. We work under the umbrella of the Missouri Organizing and Voter Engagement Collaborative, and all the organizations involved in that will come together for a centralized phone banking and text banking effort to try to contact as many voters as possible. So there are many volunteer opportunities through MCU, and I hope people listening to this will join us in that important effort.
Okay. And then for both of you, what is the best way to get involved?
Yeah, so you can go to cleanmissouri.org/volunteer. And at that form, you'll see 3 opportunities: Wednesday from 3 to 6, Thursday from 6 to 9, and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1. And but if you go to that form, you can fill that out, and an organizer will be in contact with you, so that if you are hesitant or nervous about getting involved, we can walk you through it and also make sure that, you feel prepared. And something that we have really been talking about is that with people already voting, with absentee and early voting in place, we can't wait like we have in the past until those last 10 days. Like, yes, we're going to have that huge push, but we need folks to show up now, so that as people are, getting those ballots, that they are educated and informed about what is happening. And so we would implore people to get involved earlier rather than later, because that's just like, this isn't something we can wait on, and it's just far too important to allow opposition to, confuse voters and continue the misinformation campaign that's been happening. And really the best way that we can do that is by talking to voters directly. All of the other things are super important. We really want people to be, talking to their neighbors and their friends and stuff, but really getting out and talking to voters is the number one way that we can make sure that we defeat Amendment 3.
I think the thing I'd add is that we know, based on talking to thousands of voters over the past few months, that we have a message and a strategy that works. So these are, there are times when we've perhaps campaigned and we've had longer conversations, or it's been a tough hill to climb, but voters are they get it when you say this is how politicians are trying to trick you, right? They do not like the idea, A, of politicians trying to overturn their vote, and B, that they're trying to do it in deceptive ways. And so that is our imperative as a coalition who fought so hard to make this happen in 2018, is we need everyone to know how they're trying to get duped into undoing that, into doing something unlike anything Missouri or America has ever seen.
Bob, any final thoughts on participating with MCU?
Well, yeah, so the MCU Facebook page has information about how to connect into volunteer opportunities. So we welcome any volunteers that want to get involved. There are many different ways to do it.
This is rolling into MCU's 20 in 2020 campaign, which is increasing voter turnout for each of our congregations' neighborhoods this year by 20%. So we're just finishing up reaching out to people to finish the census to make sure folks are represented that way. The last thing I want to ask each of you, Bob, you had mentioned this a little bit. So Sean and Lexi, what is it that stirs you in this fight here that is important to you on an emotional level, the reason that you keep doing this? It's been a long journey and we're down to the last leg here. So why are you still in it?
This is about the direction of our state and whether or not people are going to be in charge of the state and what happens in our legislature, or whether it's going to be a small group of big donors and politicians. And so that sounds abstract, but it is that fuels me. We're 4 or 5 years into this fight, and I'm so excited to win big a second time. I also, in COVID land, my office is right next to where my eldest son is doing a lot of his schoolwork, and where he's just been frittering away the hours playing video games, because what else are we going to do in lockdown? But if this happens where they don't count kids, he is going to vote in these new maps and he's not going to count in them. And that is so nuts. Missouri, we have the opportunity to say no, we're not doing this here in Missouri, and America, this is a really bad idea. We're showing you the way. So it is personal, it's real, but also I am so energized by going and winning big a second time.
I would say that is a lot of what Sean shared is very similar for me. I have a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. They are awesome and very engaged kids. And when I was explaining this to them, the heartbreak, truly heartbreak in their eyes that their government didn't care that they wouldn't have representation. Watching that happen and is something that, it fuels me to fight, because I right now have that, they need to be in school, they need to be doing what they're doing right now. But it also is so fundamental to, who I am and the values that I hold and what I want my children to have as they grow up. And so I would say that is the thing, that the days when it's hard or I'm tired, I remember the conversation that I had with my kids, and they get so excited when they find out that, another person signed on, or if that we're making calls, they get excited. They're like, oh, you're making calls right now? Okay, keep going. So this is something that means a lot to them. And I think that is something that, when it gets hard, we just have to remember that the abstraction is real. And these are real people when we are talking about this issue. So that's what keeps me going.
And Bob, any final thoughts on why you continue this fight?
Well, for me, it's just fundamentally about democracy. And I think 62% of the voters took a strong stand in 2018, and we got to continue to fight to preserve important democratic values. So that sums it up for me.
I think I'm along those lines too. I don't have any children, but I've got a nephew that's around 17 that he's going to fall under that. But also just the sheer frustration and anger about the audacity of not only rolling back what was passed by 62%, but changing it fundamentally in a different direction that favors one group of folks over another. It is just infuriating. And really all you can ask is that we have a level playing field and that we all play on that playing field levelly. And folks trying to tilt it one way or the other just is really enough to get my blood boiling. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this particular amendment is there's enough to dislike no matter what what angle you come from, whether it's the inherent building in a white privilege, or whether it's overturning the will of the voters, or whether it's eliminating the ability to hold your government accountable. There's enough to go around in this one.
There is. And I just want to close by saying thank you to both Kevin, you and Bob, and all of MCU. We are here because of the hard work that MCU leaders helped us pull off in 2017 and 2018. And we are poised to win big again. Because of report from faith leaders and faith communities and working families from across the state. So y'all were a part of this from the beginning. You are a part of our second victory. And so just a big thanks from the campaign for everything y'all have done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your leadership. That's going to bring our program to a close for today. I want to thank our guests today, Lexi, Amos, and Soendker Nicholson of the Clean Missouri Campaign, and Robert Karr, an organizer with MCU. To learn more about MCU, go to Metropolitan Congregations United's website at mcustlewis.org. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's where you can learn about details of events and how to become involved. I'm Kevin Prang, and you've been listening to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. Tune in again next time, and thank you for listening.